So landscape as an expression of Zen Buddhism is said to have been founded by an artist monk named Shobun, who unfortunately has no surviving works, but who we know through his student Bunsai, who does show us this idea that the monk using ink and brush is participating in a meditation, the process of painting, and that the resulting landscape evokes and invites a mind of serenity and openness. So Zen painters in Japan were responding to Chinese and Korean landscape paintings as precedents, right? And so we see lots of classical motifs that we are familiar with from literati paintings. We see an ancient gnarled pine tree. We see a solitary figure in a hermit's hut. We see the elemental forces of mountains, of water and weather. And in the distant mists, we can make out fishing boats, a hut, and tiny little people standing on the farther shore. So the painting suggests a kind of lonely, austere harmony, which is integral to Zen aesthetics. The most essential part of the painting is the empty space. Look at the composition. If you actually measured it and calculated it, I believe you would find that more than half of the picture field consists of empty space. And that field of open, empty space is so important in Japanese aesthetics that it actually has its own term, ma, the open, untouched space, the quality of openness and emptiness itself. And so ma is a poignant term that is also deeply rooted in Buddhism. Buddhism has an entire philosophical thread, very profound thread, about emptiness as the true nature of mind and of being. So when Suzuki Roshi writes that a Zen mind is a beginner's mind, he could also say that a beginner's mind is an empty mind, empty of preconceptions, empty of anything that would obstruct pure awareness, empty of anything that obscures reality. In Buddhism, the idea of emptiness is fundamental in the teaching on non-self, the teaching that all beings are empty of self, self meaning a solid, separate substance, and that our conventional minds assume that we have a solid self inside. But according to Buddhism, the true nature of all beings is a dynamic flow of interdependence in a field of living and dying. There is no me that exists independent of living processes. That is why Buddhism says that the self is empty. So it's interesting that Buddhism's very subtle teachings, like the teaching on non-self, very subtle philosophy, is actually expressed in this non-verbal form of landscape painting through choices, artistic choices like the atmospheric perspective. So that's a technical term in art history for the fact that these forms feel to us far off in a distance. Of course, they're not. This is a flat surface. And this is just more ink marks on the same flat two-dimensional surface. But we read these forms as farther back because of the way the gray scale, there's a soft transition of very feathery, very light gray tones, whereas we have strong black against light white in the foreground. And those differences create a sense of atmospheric perspective, which is the common experience in life where you look off in the distance and things seem blurrier and hazier. But we also have this kind of asymmetry in the composition between our emptiness and our rising palm tree, which helps to facilitate a sense that there is a flow and change, which also is absolutely conveyed through the sense of mists moving from the water across the mountain. And then, of course, our empty space. Let's turn to a very different painting made by Sesshu, who is considered one of Japan's greatest artists of ink and brush of all time. Now, this certainly looks different, doesn't it, than the painting we were just looking at, this winter scene where a figure is climbing up and back towards the temple on an ice-cold day when the very sky itself seems to be cracking like an icicle. Sesshu was a Zen monk and full-time painter. He traveled to China in 1467 and spent 3 years there, traveling in monasteries and studying paintings. And one of the things that's so remarkable about him is he came back with an incredible ability to paint in radically different styles. He had a fearlessly inventive approach to space, to line, to composition. Like, imagine thinking about actually cleaving the sky and the down to the earth with this one line, and then having these kind of fractured lines, as if the cold were biting and fracturing the landscape. This, one of his styles in his inventive approach is referred to as his shin style. Shin meaning sharp. So he had an angular style that emphasized complexity. But he also had what is called his so style, which means soft, wet, ultra simple. And this in particular is a brilliant example of the so style done in the haboku, the splashed ink technique, as if he's just splashed a few strokes. And there is this marvelous sense that we are witnessing the process of creating. That we feel that there's this splashing that is the actual verb of him painting, of him forming out of formlessness, or perhaps form going back into formlessness. Again, this is very resonant with Buddhist philosophy. And we certainly have our sense of Ma. And this shows us that Ma is not empty in the sense we mean. Usually in Western culture, we talk about empty as lacking. No. This is the resonant interval between forms. The resonant interval that permits clarity, the interval of breath, a sense of expansiveness. So when you look at this brilliant landscape by Sesshu, you can hear in your mind Suzuki Roshi saying our original mind includes everything within itself. It is an empty mind and a ready mind. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. So original mind is the term Suzuki Roshi uses instead of enlightened mind, which is an important point because he's saying that the mind, our original mind, the mind you were born with, was beautifully empty. It had no prejudices. And that is innate within you. It is a mind that has endless possibilities. And of course, that's what's remarkable about this landscape, where you see endless possibilities of interpretation. And they do narrow down a little bit as you look more closely and you see the little structure with its little flag on a pole. And you start to assemble tree and mountain, and yet it remains quite open.